into this a minute. I want to get into Robert Mueller. The media are spectacularly partisan and incompetent. And all they keep doing is yelling to the president if he's going to fire Robert Mueller. And if he were to fire Robert Mueller, they'd be calling for his impeachment immediately. We've now reached a point in this country where a president of the United States can't fire a rogue prosecutor who's trying to fire him. It's a remarkable thing. I want to tell you a little bit about Robert Mueller because they're painting him as some kind of saint, some kind of angel. He's none of those things. He's a vicious bastard. That's what he is. Many years ago, there was a piece by columnist Kevin Cullen in the Boston Globe, hardly a right-wing platform. And the title is One Lingering Question for FBI Director Robert Mueller. Back in 1976, as we were celebrating the 200th birthday of this republic, Congress passed a law limiting the tenure of the FBI director to 10 years. This was done because after the scandalous findings of the Church Commission, Congress realized that letting J. Edgar Hoover serve as director of the Bureau from its founding in 1935 until his death in 1972 had only confirmed Lord Acton's maxim that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Got that? And a special counsel who's unaccountable to anybody, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Hoover was a power unto himself, and the FBI that was created very much in his image sometimes acted more like the secret police of the totalitarian regimes Hoover regularly denounced. Running road wiretaps, harassing political dissidents, using illegal means to collect evidence, Hoover's FBI wasn't accountable. It was untouchable. And I want to say this, again, I'm not talking about the men and women out there chasing criminals, protecting this country, but the same thing has happened at the top level of the FBI. Unaccountable, untouchable, collecting evidence through illegal means, espionage and so forth, false information or the omission of information when it comes to the FISA court, the use of opposition research paid for by another campaign and another political party. The list goes on and on and on. The top levels of the FBI are as corrupt as they were under J. Edgar Hoover, and quite frankly more so, because this gaggle of corrupt FBI senior officials interfered with the presidential election. And so the columnist goes on about Mueller. So now, just weeks after the FBI's worst nightmare, a gangster and FBI informant by the name of Whitey Bulger came strolling back into town. Congress is about to ignore its own wisdom and let Bob Mueller, the FBI director and former U.S. attorney in Boston, stay on an extra 2 years. President Obama says he needs Mueller to stay because there's been so much turnover in the national security teams at the CIA and Pentagon, and all that's well and good. Mueller has wide, bipartisan support in Congress, to paraphrase Lloyd Bentsen, the former and now late senator, Democrat from Texas. I know Bob Mueller, and he's no J. Edgar Hoover, though the folks at the ACLU might take exception to that. The recent FBI targeting of anti-war and labor activists in the Midwest has a disturbing echo of the days when the Bureau considered Martin Luther King Jr. a sinister threat to national security. But Mueller's a Marine vet and tough enough to take a question or two before Congress gives the president what he wants. And Mike Albano, A-L-B-A-N-O, is just the guy to ask it. Excuse me. He's just the guy to ask it. What did you know about Whitey Bulger, Mr. Mueller, and when did you know it? Now, Bulger was a mobster in Boston. He killed dozens of people, ladies and gentlemen. He was a vicious, vicious killer. Turns out he was an FBI informant. And he was still killing people while he was an FBI informant. Back in the 1980s, when he was serving on the Massachusetts Parole Board, Albano expressed some sympathy for a group of men would always maintain they had been framed for the 1965 gangland murder of a hoodlum named Teddy Deegan in Chelsea. The FBI had been instrumental in seeing that the men, Peter Limone, Henry Tamaglio, Joe Salvanti, and Louis Greco, were convicted. The FBI contended that Tamaglio was the consigliere of the mafia in Boston, and Limone was a mafia leader. There's no question that both men were bad actors and mafia players, but the evidence showed that neither had anything to do with Deegan's murder. So 1983, after Albano, remember Albano's on this Pardon and Parole Commission. In 1983, after Albano indicated he might vote to release Limone, he got a visit from a pair of FBI agents named John Connolly and John Morris. They told Albano that the men convicted of Deegan's murder were bad guys. They were made guys. Albano said, they told me that if I wanted to stay in public life, I shouldn't vote to release a guy like Limone. They intimidated me. Turns out that Connolly, Agent Connolly, FBI Agent Connolly, was Whitey Bulger's corrupt handler. And Agent Morris was Connolly's corrupt supervisor. See, they were on the take. When they weren't pocketing bribes from Bulger, they were helping him murder potential witnesses who were poised to expose the FBI's sordid, Faustian deal with a rat named Whitey Bulger. Albano was messing with the FBI's national policy of going after the mafia and the mafia alone. That was the justification the FBI gave for making deals with devils like Whitey Bulger and his partner in crime, Stevie Flemmi. They were supposedly giving up their pals in the mafia. The problem with the FBI's national policy is that it didn't take into account the most vicious, murderous gangsters in Boston were Whitey Bulger and Stevie Flemmi. After Albano was elected mayor of Springfield in 1995, he soon found the FBI hot on his tail, investigating his administration for corruption. The FBI took down several people in his administration, and Albano was convinced the FBI wasn't interested in public integrity as much as humiliating him because he dared to defy them. In 2001, the 4 men convicted of Teddy Deegan's murder were exonerated. Turned out the FBI let them take the rap to protect one of their informants, a killer named Vincent Jimmy Flemmi, who just happened to be the brother of their other rat, Stevie Flemmi. So here these men sat in jail for years. Thanks to the FBI's corruption, taxpayers got stuck with the $100 million bill for compensating the framed men, 2 of whom, Greco and Tamaglio, died in prison. So the FBI knew these men were not the killers for which they'd been convicted. They were set up. Albano was appalled that later that same year Mueller was appointed FBI director because it was Mueller, first as an assistant U.S. attorney, then as the acting U.S. attorney in Boston, who wrote letters to the Parole and Pardons Board throughout the 1980s opposing clemency for the 4 men framed by FBI lies. Got that? Of course, Mueller was also in that position while Whitey Bulger was helping the FBI cart off criminal competitors even as he buried bodies in shallow graves along the way. Before he gets that extension, Mike Albano said, somebody in the Senator House needs to ask him why the U.S. Attorney's Office he led let the FBI protect Whitey Bulger. The columnist said, I called FBI headquarters in Washington, and I tried to do just that. The nice lady who answered suggested I talk to one of the FBI's public affairs specialists, but my call wasn't returned. 4 years ago, when questioned about the FBI's corruption in Boston, Mueller told the Globe, I think the public should recognize that what happened years ago. That's true. And we still don't know what really happened, he writes. Mr. Mueller. But there's more about Mr. Mueller you need to know. There's more about Mr. Mueller you need to know. as senators of both parties run to his defense, as Chuck Schumer again puts out the argument they need to pass a statute to protect him, even though that would be unconstitutional. It's all political games and political positioning. But I want you to know the man behind these warrants, what this man is doing to the lives of all kinds of people who've been gathered up and devoured by his investigation, and that he truly has no conscience. He truly has no conscience. Stick with me. I'll be right back.
Mark Levin.
How would you like to be part of an effort to put a free copy of the Constitution and Declaration of Independence in the hands of every middle school and high school student in the nation? Students aren't being taught the Constitution, so how can we expect them to understand and embrace what's necessary to protect freedom? Hillsdale College wants to change all that, but they need your help. Hillsdale's taking the unprecedented step of sending a copy of the Constitution and Declaration to every middle school and high school principal in America, along with an offer to provide free copies for every student. Hillsdale's doing this because they believe that educating the next generation is vital to preserving liberty, and because they love America. Learn how you can help in this historic effort, and how you can get your own copy of Hillsdale's Pocket Constitution to keep or give away by visiting levinforhillsdale.com. That's Levin for Hillsdale.com to find out how to help send pocket constitutions to public schools and to get your own free copy. That's Levin for Hillsdale.com. Levinforhillsdale.com. I want to tell you about another matter we talked about briefly, and we'll probably have to carry this over after the bottom of the hour. That's this infamous anthrax case in Washington, D.C. And I like the way Daniel Ashman over at the Federalist wrote about this about a month ago. He said, mystery surrounds Robert Mueller and his investigation into Russia and President Trump. Some think he's the ultimate professional. Others think he's a Democrat lackey. Still others maintain he's working on Trump's side. We can see how he works if we look at how Mueller ran his second most important investigation as FBI director. In September 2001, an entity began mailing anthrax through the U.S. postal system, hitting such prominent targets as NBC and Senator Daschle's office. The terrorist attacks killed 5 and left others hospitalized, and the world panicked. Under Mueller's management, the FBI launched an investigation lasting 10 years. They now brag about spending hundreds of thousands of investigator hours on the case. Let's take a closer look at Mueller's response to understand the context of the investigation and who his people investigated, targeted, and found guilty. The anthrax letters began just a week after the 9/11 attack. While planning the airline hijackings, Al-Qaeda had been weaponizing anthrax, setting up a lab in Afghanistan named Bayazid Sufat, the same man who housed 2 of the 9/11 hijackers. 2 hijackers later sought medical help due to conditions consistent with infection via anthrax. Al-Haznawi went to the emergency room for a skin lesion, which he claimed was from bumping into a suitcase. And ringleader Muhammad Atta needed medicine for skin irritation. A team of bioterrorism experts from Johns Hopkins confirmed that anthrax was the most likely cause of the lesions. Meanwhile, the 9/11 hijackers were also trying to obtain crop dusting airplanes. So how did Mueller's investigative team handle the case? Mueller issued a statement in October 2001 while anthrax victims were all still dying. The FBI had found no direct link to organized terrorism, it said. The Johns Hopkins team of experts was mistaken, the FBI continued. Al-Haznawi never had an anthrax infection. The crop dusting airplanes they needed was possibly for a separate and unrelated anthrax attack. A few weeks later, the FBI released a remarkable profile of the attacker. FBI experts eschewed analysis of the content of the letters, was written in bold block letters, death to America, death to Israel, Allah is great. Instead, they focused on a linguistic analysis, stating that the letter's writer was atypical in many respects and not comfortable or practiced in writing in lowercase lettering. The FBI therefore concluded that it was likely a disgruntled American was responsible with bad personal skills. The investigators hypothesized that the attacker was a lonely American who had wanted to kill people with anthrax for some undefined time period, but then became mission-oriented following 9/11 and immediately prepared and mailed the deadly spores while pretending to be a Muslim. Mueller's FBI honed in on Stephen Hatfill as the culprit. Stephen Hatfill, a flag-waving American who'd served in the Army, then dedicated himself to protecting America from bioterrorist threats by working in the United States Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases. There was no direct link from Hatfill to the attacks by the FBI's own admission, and the Bureau never charged Hatfill. The FBI did, however, spy on him, follow him, and harass him nonstop for years. The Department of Justice also publicly outed Hatfill as the possible terrorist. While Hatfill's dignity and life was being trampled on by America's secret police, Mueller took a stand, but on a different topic. He made front-page news for threatening President Bush he would resign over NSA policy, all while his own team was trampling on the rights of an American in the FBI's largest ever investigation. Hatfill successfully sued the government for its unlawful actions. He won almost $6 million. After the Hatfill investigation blew up in the FBI's face, they moved on to Bruce Ivins, another Army researcher who had actually volunteered to help the FBI investigate the case and had been doing so for years. It wasn't until 5 years after the attack that Mueller's men decided Ivins was a target. Now, the FBI case against Ivins once again was based on circumstantial evidence. The prosecution stated Ivins purposefully gave a misleading sample of anthrax spore, but Frontline on PBS documented this was not true. Ivins was familiar with the area from which the anthrax letters were mailed, the FBI said, but Pulitzer Prize-winning ProPublica lays out the accepted facts of the case, showing it was impossible for Ivins to make the trip to mail the letters. The spores used in the attacks were a similar type to the laboratory spores where Ivins worked, but that ignored the fact that the anthrax letters had a unique additive, so sophisticated and dangerous, a scientist commented, "This is not your mother's anthrax," that was likely produced by a nation-state or Al-Qaeda. Ivins was never indicted, just given the same treatment as Hatfill. His house was raided, he was threatened with a death sentence, or as his lawyer put it, put under relentless pressure of accusation and innuendo. Ivins committed suicide. Ivins committed suicide. 1 week later, U.S. Attorney Jeffrey Taylor stated Ivins was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, and they were confident that Dr. Ivins was the only person responsible for these attacks. Democrat Senator Patrick Leahy, one of the intended victims of the anthrax terror attacks, did not believe that Ivins was the sole actor. Mueller ordered an independent audit of the FBI's case by the National Academy of Sciences, then formally closed the case in 2010, sticking with the conclusion that Ivins, and Ivins alone, committed the terror attack. 1 year later, the NAS, the National Academy of Sciences, released the results and confirmed what many scientists had been repeating for years. The FBI's science and conclusions were not solid. A former FBI official involved in the investigation sued the FBI, alleging the FBI concealed evidence exculpatory to Ivins. Mueller made his position known, saying, "I do not apologize for any aspect of this investigation," and stated that the FBI made no mistakes. The investigation was an unmitigated disaster for America. Mueller didn't go after Al-Qaeda for the anthrax letters because he couldn't find a direct link. But then he targeted American citizens without showing a direct link. For his deeds, he had the second longest tenure as FBI director and was roundly applauded by nearly everyone, except Louis Gohmert, by the way. Now he's running the Trump-Russia investigation. And there's a lot more about Mueller. But let's talk about his number two, Andrew Weissmann, who Mueller chose to be his number two.